Is it a crime to be naked in public in California? Well, yes and no. Yes, we do have this law called indecent exposure, which it's a misdemeanor, but it requires you to be a sex offender for life if you're convicted. It's a serious offense, and we see it charged a lot. But the fact is that it's really only indecent exposure if you are being an exhibitionist, if you are actually getting sexual arousal from being naked, if you're trying to arouse yourself or other people or create a scene. But if you're simply changing at the beach, if you're simply changing in your car, if you're having sex in your car but you're trying to stay secluded and not offend anybody or not be seen, then it's really not indecent exposure. Now, you can still get arrested. People get arrested all the time, even when what they do doesn't really meet the elements of the crime. So I would not advise it. I mean, if you want to be safe, if you want to stay out of trouble, I would say don't be naked in public. But just because you get caught naked in public, that doesn't necessarily mean you've committed a crime. Now, indecent exposure is a wobbler. It could be filed as a felony or a misdemeanor. Usually it's filed just as a misdemeanor. But the terrible thing about being convicted of indecent exposure is that it requires you to be a registered sex offender for life. So if you're convicted even as a misdemeanor, you'll have to register the rest of your life as a convicted sex offender. Therefore, I would advise anybody who's charged with this crime to not to plead guilty, but to see an attorney and do everything that you can to keep this off your record. We had a client recently who was over at the beach in Santa Monica, and he was came in from the water and he was changing over in the parking lot, and he was naked for a few moments while he was changing, and some people saw him and reported it, and he was charged with indecent exposure. But we went to court and we demonstrated that he was not trying to exhibit himself, that he was not trying to draw people's attention, that he was not doing this for any sort of sexual gratification, but he was simply changing, and ultimately the charges were dismissed.